Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Tuesday, February 14th. Our topic today centers around forest management and why that's important and what are some of the challenges and opportunities presented around that today. And to discuss that, we're very fortunate to have with us in our virtual studio two folks who are very well qualified to speak about that. Heather Furman is the State Director of the Nature Conservancy in Vermont. She leads a statewide team of folks to achieve a resilient and connected landscape for both nature and people. And Rob Terry is the Executive Director of the Merck Forest Farmland Center up in nearby Rupert, Vermont. It's a 3,500-acre parcel of conserved educational and recreational property in Rupert that practices sustainable agriculture and forestry methods, as well as welcoming visitors to learn about natural and working lands. So, Heather, Rob, great to have you with us today. Thank you very much for making the time for this conversation. Really appreciate that. And I guess I thought we could perhaps start by simply having the two of you talk a little bit about both of your organizations. Heather, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about the Nature Conservancy. It's a national organization, as I understand it, not just in Vermont.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's actually an international organization. The Nature Conservancy has been around since 1961 is when we incorporated. And we've been here in Vermont for a little over 60 years with the help of folks at the University of Vermont and around the state. We formed the Vermont chapter. We've been busy conserving lands and waters for the last 60 plus years. We've protected about 300,000 acres in Vermont, including 23% of our state-owned lands. We've had a hand in protecting wildlife management areas, state parks, state forests. And so we have a great team here in Vermont, about 30 staff, a wonderful board of trustees, and we're able to connect into the larger organization at the national and global scale to tackle what are the two largest existential threats right now, climate change and biodiversity loss.
Okay. Well, Rob, over to you. Tell us a little bit about Merck Forest and Farmland Center. I have to always remember to add that second part in.
Yeah, absolutely. They're both really important to us, so thank you for thinking about that, Andrew. So Merck was founded in 1950 in what at the time was still mostly denuded landscape, almost free from trees because of the management practices that kind of swept through the state of Vermont in the late 17 and early to mid 1800s. Our founder, who had been kind of connected with innovative forestry due to some family connections that he had, saw the land and landscape as an opportunity to practice sustainable forests and see what would be possible working with the local community to rehabilitate a forest that was in trouble at the time. Since then, we have grown in scope to really focus almost more on an annual basis in connecting people to the land, trying to bridge the gap that has been created in part by urbanization and a number of other factors that have pulled much of our population further away from a direct connection and relationship with the land. So we do that on a 3,500-acre managed forest with about 35 miles of trail, close to a dozen backcountry cabins and lean-tos that folks can rent, a 60-acre farm where we practice sustainable and regenerative practices, and a host of programs that are designed to engage folks from kind of the beginning of their relationship with the woods to the end of their relationship with the woods, thinking about how we can live in concert with these beautiful and amazing spaces.
And it certainly is a beautiful and amazing space there too. I've often enjoyed walking some of your trails. But anyway, I thought we could perhaps start by talking a little bit about the COP15 summit that recently concluded up in Montreal, the United Nations Biodiversity Summit held there. I guess it concluded last December. And Heather, I guess I just wanted to ask you, how important of a milestone was this conference, the summit, with regards to helping promote biodiversity?
I mean, it's incredible. It's actually really monumental. This is the first time that global targets have been set for protecting biodiversity. There were something on the order of 196 countries that came together from around the world And what they did is finally set and adopt some targets, and it sets an intention for the world to shoot for. Funding commitments have been made. A number of countries have already started working on achieving their targets. So 30 by 30% of the world's lands, oceans, fresh waters, protected for both nature and people. And so it's really exciting to see these targets finally get set. I know you want to talk about it, but there's already a lot of discussion going on in the state of Vermont about this 30 by 30 target. I want to say one of the other commitments of COP15 was to commit resources, real money and real resources to protecting our planet, to protecting the world's oceans, lands, and waters. The U.S. committed something like $700 billion, or identified a $700 billion annual gap in funding that's needed to protect the lands and waters that we have here in Vermont. So it's really exciting. It gives us all something to shoot for, and kind of sets the world's intentions in motion to protect the planet.
So I'm assuming you're feeling that there's more than just words that were the right words being spoken, but there's actual commitments to achieving, tangible and realistic targets.
Yeah, there's always going to be a range of level of commitment in these kinds of conferences. I think what's really important is that there has been an articulation and a verbal commitment made for the world to point to and strive toward. And so that, to me, is really important. We haven't had that before. We haven't had these kinds of targets. And I think what is, maybe the wake-up call that's happening right now is that we are in a state of the world right now where we are seeing enormous ecosystem conversion, meaning, the very fabric of life is eroding. Biodiversity is collapsing, and we've heard it called the sixth extinction. We've heard statistics on the order of, up to 80+% of species abundance has evaporated in the last 50 years. In my lifetime, we've seen huge declines in species and wildlife. And that's not just about, the species. It's about all of the plants and animals that make up that kind of fabric of life, and that fabric of life that supports our clean air and our clean water and the things that, just make our world function. And if you start to erode that fabric and you start to have ecosystem collapse, human life is in peril. So I think that's been the wake-up call that has taken the world's focus and put it on COP15 and said, we need to set these targets, and we are all going to do what we can to make progress toward those targets.
Rob,
so we're starting to see that happen
vigorously there.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we think and talk about a lot with our visitors and participants in our programs is that we're not people who come to Merck Forest aren't in nature, they're of nature. It's easy to think of nature is separate of us, the forest is separate of us, something that is novel, precious, and needs to be protected. Anything that drives someone to protect these spaces is valuable. But I think it's just critical for us to understand that in protecting these spaces, it's not just for the species that we share this planet with, which is important, but it's also for us. We're intertwined with the natural system and completely dependent on its health and vitality. We talked about 30 by 30, which is a goal that we're excited to see out there, that we support wholeheartedly. In that there's sort of that 30% space that hopefully will be protected by 2030. About 8% of the land in the U.S. is kind of urban, suburban, and that leaves the other 62% out there. And that's the space that we think about a lot. How can we bring ecologically sound management that allows us to continue to provision off the landscape in a way that meets our needs, but in a way that's also ecologically net positive. So the work that we're trying to do in the woods, the work that we're trying to do in the farm is really about thinking about the system as a whole, and how can we actively manage it, make it better, and still meet our basic habitat needs as a species. And organizations like TNC are making that easier for us by pushing hard on science that we're allowed to kind of get into the slip of and apply on a landscape, on a land and landscape level, which is just fabulous for us.
Yeah, Rob, I love that. I love that. I love the stats that you just quoted, because it's not about just setting aside land and locking it up. It really is about the interplay of humans with the land. And we do need places. I hope that we have places forever where we have wildlife and for wild things to thrive. But the vast majority of our landscape has been touched by humans and is going to continue to be touched by humans. And we need to live and work in a landscape where we have nature as part of what we do. We have those spaces for our rivers to flow free and for them to be connected to their floodplains and for our water quality to improve. So it's about kind of the 30 by 30 goal is important. We need kind of a stopgap, but we also need to have those places where humans understand that the interplay between what they do in their daily lives is contributing to a healthier and more resilient world.
So I should probably just quickly ask you both, what is 30 by 30? 30% of the country is to be preserved in a biodiverse state by 2030? Is that roughly it, or?
So I'm sure there's actually probably a lot of different interpretations of what is 30 by 30. So there is a consensus of scientists around the world, including the Nature Conservancy science, that says that if we are able to effectively protect, and there is some definition discussion around what does it mean to effectively protect 30% of the world's lands, waters, and oceans, that we have the underpinnings for it sustaining the fabric of life. Ecosystems aren't going to collapse if we are able to effectively protect 30% of the world's lands, waters, and oceans. So then you get, what does that mean? Well, in our view, it needs to be protected for biodiversity, function, and health. And so in some cases, it does mean, having some land set aside where nature can thrive and kind of is protected for its own value and its intrinsic purposes. But that also includes lands that are managed, that it includes our floodplains and rivers where we have the ability for those, for nature to kind of sustain itself over time. So, I think we will probably end up getting into more of a discussion at the State House and other places about what does it mean to protect 30 by 30. But the key, in my view, is that we have a functioning, healthy ecosystem as part of that mix.
Rob, I assume you agree with that?
Oh yeah, 100%. And at the hyper local level, when you look at a property like Merck, when we think about making decisions in the various stands and compartments, which is kind of how we organize and divide our forest based on forest type, soil type, and a number of other features. We're managing the whole forest, mostly for habitat and forest health, but that does allow us to provision timber and provision fuel wood and pulpwood off the landscape occasionally. But even here, where we're actively managing the forest, there are highly ecologically valuable and highly ecologically vulnerable stands that we set aside as well in kind of a no-touch zone. So expanding that concept of increasing protection to a larger percentage of the ocean, near ocean, and land resource globally, so that we can provide maintain the foundation of a functioning ecosystem, which we require to persist on our home planet. Yeah, I nod vigorously anytime someone speaks in support of that.
Well, the other thing I'll say, if I can chime in here, Andrew, is the exciting thing is that we know where these places are. Like, we've been doing science in this state for 40, 50, 60 years to identify where those places are that are most special in terms of their biodiversity and their ecosystem health. And we know where the places are on the landscape that are most climate resilient. And we have two tools that the state of Vermont uses. We have our Vermont Conservation Design, which has mapped all of the places in Vermont for their climate resilience, their ecosystem health, biodiversity health, and then the Nature Conservancy's resilient and connected network science, which is kind of, it has a little finer grain on that look of where are the places on the landscape that are going to really be able to persist over time as the climate changes. So we have the science. We know where we need to be working to protect that landscape that is, important for biodiversity and connected so that biodiversity thrives and species thrive over time. So we know what to do and where to do it. It's just a matter of now political will to get busy and protect that network.
Yeah, and that science, those two bodies of work in particular, have already inspired organizations, ours included, to think about conservation efforts beyond our boundaries in ways that we weren't previously. So both of those bodies of work demonstrated the 42,000 acre unfragmented, which means free of interior development, free of road. So the 42,000 acre unfragmented forest parcel that Merck sits at the northern tip of is a critical pinch point in a migratory corridor connecting species as far south as the southern Appalachians up to the North Woods, and by the Vermont Conservation Design was indicated highest priority feature in every category except grassland. And there are like a dozen to 15 other categories. So seeing the work that TNC did, seeing the BioFinder, has us for the first time, this is something that we've been doing for about 2 years now, reaching out to landowners beyond our boundaries who own land in that 42,000 acre unfragmented forest and starting to have conversations with them about how important this particular forest block is. So, once we have that science in place, it creates a real clean pathway for organizations like ours who are kind of on the ground doing work in that land and in those landscapes to justify these conversations with our neighbors that will hopefully lead to, more awareness, potentially permanent protection for a higher percentage of that landscape, or a number of other outcomes that will be, forest and ecologically positive in the long run.
So last year, Governor Philip Scott vetoed a bill known as the Community Resilience and Biodiversity Act, H606, I think was the technical number. But there's another bill working its way through the legislature this year that seems very similar to that, and we have a slightly different makeup of the political parties this year. So it might be possible, should the governor decide to veto that bill, have that veto overridden. I guess I'm just wondering, have you been in conversations with any of the legislators who are working on that bill?
I'm happy to chime in on this. So H126 is the bill you're referring to. Again, this is a bill that, most importantly would set targets, 30 by 30. This is a direct connection to Montreal. It's a direct connection to the work of the Biden administration to support 30 by 30 nationally. We can do this here in Vermont. It's really important that we set targets for protection. It is past time that we set some targets for protection. We've never had this before. What it would compel us to do as a community of Vermonters is to develop a plan for conservation. And we've never really had that before either, a statewide plan that kind of says, hey, we know where we need to protect. We've got the science now. We've been working on this for a long time. We have crisis on our hands. We know what we can do to improve flood resilience through the state. We know what we can do to sequester more carbon. We know the places where we need to improve access to the outdoors for communities. We know how to protect places that would make communities less vulnerable. Why aren't we doing this right now? And so what this bill would do is say it's time for us to put a plan together, a statewide conservation plan. We are fully in support of that. How that plan gets developed needs to be, with a lot of public participation and input. But, in short, Andrew, we're well past due. Other states are doing this. We're seeing lots of states who are taking action to plan at a statewide level because, Andrew Rob just said so eloquently just now, we're looking beyond our borders. We're looking at how we connect in with other places on the landscape. We have to be doing that. The climate crisis and biodiversity crisis compel us to do that. So again, it's time for us to put a statewide plan together to identify the places that, are kind of like, that are absolutely critical for Vermonters and for nature as we go forward.
One thing I wanted to ask, I read an article last week that as I was thinking about this conversation we're having today, kind of struck me. We've talked a lot, heard a lot about the need to build green infrastructure, particularly to service electric vehicles, solar farms, the electrification of our energy sources. And right now the national grid is I think not up to snuff to handle that. And so therefore there would need to be a lot of power lines, I assume, built that maybe don't exist now, or ones that do exist upgraded. Is there a potential conflict you see between that need to amplify our energy infrastructure, particularly with power lines and transmission infrastructure, and keeping forest fragmentation to a minimum and biodiversity, moving in the right direction? Rob, you want to take that one on?
Rob, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, human development and incursion in a landscape perforates forests in a way that has surprising impact on interior forest species that need range and space, that the kind of things that you'd get really excited if you saw run through your yard and you don't see every day. They're running through your yard because they don't want to be there. Our bears, our bobcats, our occasional lynx, our fishers, all kinds of animals need to be half a mile or a mile away from any kind of human incursion. So, you start to build power lines and service power lines, and that impacts forest integrity. I could squint from the side and say maybe there are some young forest benefits to some of the spaces where we get power line cuts, because a lot of our forest in the state of Vermont has kind of a even age development, and the young brushy shrubby habitat is important for a diverse ecosystem, but the perforated forest really does some damage.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. And I'm going to go back to the fact that we know, by and large, we know now where those kind of no regrets places are that we need to protect. And we should be doing everything that we can to conserve and ensure that those places are managed for ecosystem function and health. Like, we can do that as a state. And we can also identify places that are appropriate for additional siting or transmission, improvements that don't conflict with those places. But we need to be willing to look at it from a statewide scale. We need to be willing to look at it, through the lens of a statewide plan, which in Vermont, we have, we Vermonters, we're very focused on our local places, but we're living in a time where there is so much connectivity to the rest of the world. We need to be thinking about how we connect into the larger grid, how our landscape connects into the larger, appellations that Rob just mentioned. We can do that, and we should be doing that. And it's going to take some thoughtful planning on the part of a lot of people. But over time, we absolutely need to transition to a clean energy future. We need to have a grid and a transmission system that can support that, and we can do that thoughtfully. We really can, and I think that 30 by 30 sets us on the path to start having that conversation about what does it mean to protect our no regrets places on a statewide basis. And that will continue to evolve into a conversation about where do we want to build out our energy infrastructure. One thing I will say is, without that kind of statewide look, and that statewide look can help with recreation planning, it can help with energy planning, transportation planning, but without that kind of that statewide look, we're continuing to do piecemeal development, and what we're seeing is siting, energy siting projects that are starting to cut down forests and starting to, encroach on wetlands. And these are areas that are, that are already serving in terms of sequestering carbon, in terms of cleaning our water. And so, the trade-off between siting on this piecemeal basis where a forest is cut down or it's poorly sited, the infrastructure is poorly sited, really doesn't advance what I think we all want, is to, have a protected and resilient and connected landscape for nature and people, and also move toward a clean energy future.
We have a couple minutes left. Oh, I'm sorry, Rob. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to nod vigorously again. The absolutely. We know the factors that lead to forest fragmentation. There are a bunch of them, but they are factors like increased exurbanization, escalating land value, landowner secession, and many of those factors are present and rising in the state of Vermont. So if we don't implement statewide protections, if we don't take that statewide look that Heather's mentioning, fragmentation is at the door. Those factors are present right now, and we need to do something in the short term to ensure that we continue to have healthy forest resource in this state.
Okay, so in the minute or so that we have left, I'm going to ask you probably the most gnarly question you're going to hear all the time. We've been here. Act 250, that's the land use bill that's been under revision for several years now. It's more than 50 years old. What would you like, in 30 seconds or less, what would each of you like to see happen in a revision of Act 250?
Oh, where do I start? I guess I will say, Act 250 was the first time that we tried as a state to take a statewide look at how we are developing and where we wanted to develop. And, there's a lot of things within Act 250 that probably need updating and modernizing. And I think what I'll say right now, because we're short on time, is that, again, I'll go back to the need to really think about where we want to site development on a statewide basis and where we want to protect and what do we want to protect our landscape for. It's probably time to take a fresh look at that. And again, the 30 by 30 bill and the desire to have a statewide comprehensive conservation plan, the ability to think statewide about where we site our energy and housing infrastructure is all really important. We have Act 250 districts that all act independently and very differently in how they approach Act 250 review. And so maybe it's time for us to zoom back out and, again, identify those no regrets places and make sure that we're doing everything we can to protect them.
Yeah, not surprisingly, Heather nailed it. The state has done a tremendous amount of really effective science since the initial drafting of Act 250. Organizations like TNC have done a tremendous amount of effective science since the drafting of Act 250. So it's time to follow the science. We know more now than we did then, so we've got to make those adjustments based on what we know.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there for today. I'm sure there's much more we could talk about on this subject. It's quite fascinating in so many levels. But so that means maybe we'll have to have the two of you back again at some point to go into part 2. But unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there for today. But I wanted to thank once again Heather Furman, the State Director of the Nature Conservancy in Vermont, and Rob Terry, the Executive Director of Merck Forest Farmland Center in Rupert. Thank you both. Thank you for being with us today, and we hope you found our program interesting. And we'll see you again the next time when we have these two folks back again. Meanwhile, have a great day.